afternoon. Today I'm joined by Social Development Minister Paula Bennett for a pre-budget announcement on welfare reform. As you're aware, welfare reform is an important part of the National Lead Government's program. We're making good progress on what are significant changes to the system, and today we're here to talk about some of the details of the first phase of reform which are included in Budget 2012. We've always been very clear that our welfare reforms will require upfront investment, particularly in the early stages, to get more people off welfare and into work. We're prepared to invest to get people into work. You will see from the material before you, which the Minister will explain in more detail shortly, that we're making a considerable investment in the first phases of reforms. As we've indicated before, we expect the full cost of welfare reforms to be in the vicinity of $520 million over 4 years, which we estimate will be offset by savings of $1 billion over 4 years. Today we're announcing how much we'll be investing in the first phase of welfare reform. Phase 1 affects young people, both those already on a benefit as well as those 16 and 17-year-olds who are on a collision course with the welfare system. It also affects some people on a sole parent, widows or women alone benefit. The amount we'll be spending on the first phase is $287.5 million over a 4-year period. That includes paying for childcare, which is absolutely vital to the success of these welfare reforms. We are investing $80 million to cover the costs of childcare for those on benefits so that they can get back to work. It's a substantial investment, but one we consider to be more than justified. It will remove a significant barrier for many people who we will be supporting to get into education, training or work. We know that without significant intervention, teen parents are more likely to stay on a benefit for longer than any other group. We're ensuring that they can get help with parenting and budgeting skills and get support to reach NCEA Level 2 or in some cases to go into training or work-based learning. Other sole parents will also be able to access childcare through this package, and we will have dedicated staff at Work and Income to help them. The Minister will expand on that in a moment. Finally, I want to stress that right now we have 12% of the working age population in New Zealand on welfare, with 220,000 children living in benefit-dependent homes. We are spending more on those who are likely to stay on welfare long term, and that's why over time you'll see the costs of welfare reduce. As you know, in March I announced the Government's 10 key result areas in a speech about better public services. These are 10 special areas where we have set clear results about what we want to achieve over the next 3 to 5 years. These welfare reforms tie into 3 of those result areas. First is reducing the number of people who have been on the benefit for more than 12 months. The second is increasing participation in early childhood education. And the third is increasing the proportion of 18-year-olds with NCEA Level 2. We are determined to ensure more New Zealanders get opportunities to have a better life in work and not on welfare. So I hand over to Paula. She'll make any comments you want. As is the normal drill, we'll take questions from there and then we'll come back and do the normal other questions in other areas you might have. Minister,
thank you, Prime Minister. So, as the Prime Minister said, the first phase of welfare reforms will cost $287.5 million, and the $80 million for childcare is a vital component within that. This is broken up into 2 parts. $44 million will be spent on early childhood education places, which we're essentially buying from the Ministry of Education. A further $36.1 million is for the guaranteed childcare assistance payment. This subsidy provides up to $6 per hour towards childcare for up to a maximum of 50 hours per week, and it can also help some of those teen mums with travel costs. As we begin working with teen parents to get them into education and training, and with other sole parents going into work, we need to remove the barriers to achieving those goals. Having dedicated frontline staff available is also vital to helping job seekers, in particular overcoming barriers to work or training. So we're investing a $55.1 million in 155 dedicated work and income staff who will do this. We've been very clear youth are the main focus of the first part of welfare reform. We cannot continue to allow our young people to drift into the welfare system at a young age where they are at risk of becoming long-term welfare dependent. 90% of disengaged 16 and 17-year-olds will go on to an adult benefit unless we intervene. Evidence tells us teen parents who go on a benefit are likely to spend at least 7 of the next 10 years on welfare. They are more likely to have more children while on welfare, and their children are likely to go on welfare themselves in years to come. The future for them and their children is incredibly challenging. Under the old system, 16 and 17-year-olds and 16 to 18-year-old teen parents were handed a sum of money every week and left to get on with it. This will change. Under the new system, we are spending $148.8 million on services for young people. This includes budgeting and parenting courses, payments to youth service providers, and a $10 a week incentive payment to young people. This also includes milestone payments for those youth service providers who will be given real flexibility to work with these young people to get them into education or training. $77.6 million is going to support the roughly 14,000 disengaged 16 and 17-year-olds who are not in education, employment or training. We're specifically targeting funding at this group because they are most at risk of ending up on welfare. Previously, Youth Transition Services have used their funding to provide universal services to a much wider age group. That means, in many cases, they are contacting and working with young people who are going to be just fine and don't need intervention. We are targeting the support where it's most needed. As a result of this investment, we are going to be spending more on youth services than we do currently, an extra $75 million over 4 years. Also included in the youth services component of this package is $1 million to fund the cost of approved long-acting reversible contraception for young people. We'll pay for the doctor's visit and the cost of the LARC itself, where the cost is not fully funded by Pharmac. This will be available firstly to those in the youth package, but will be extended to the wider beneficiary population. By delivering these welfare reforms, I know I can look New Zealanders in the eye and say this is a system that will be tough but fair. It will cost more upfront, but it will mean fewer people on welfare in the long run. These are the reforms that New Zealanders voted for and that we will deliver.
Okay, questions?
So where does that reprioritised money come from?
Yeah, from a number of places. So some is from the YTS, as I said earlier, so that's coming from YTS and some from the youth vote funding. That's about $58.8 million. We've got a remainder in a tag contingency. We've got 81.5 that's new money, that's coming from the operating allowance. We've got about $96 million that's coming from out years and employment assistance that we're bringing forward and spending earlier and putting into this new way of working, and about $40 million is coming from an underspend in a QS&I fund.
So you're not worried that you're cutting too many services to pay for this?
No. So what we're doing is, as you can see with the YTS in particular, we are reconfiguring it, but we're not actually cutting any other services as such to put into this. We are reprioritising from other areas, but most of it's from underspends that haven't been as effective as we'd like them to be.
What prompted the assistance with the long-acting reversible contraception? Was that something that young people were asking for? Or?
Well, we certainly have concerns about subsequent children and children being born, particularly to those on welfare, and we see the access to contraception as actually being a barrier, particularly the cost around it. Pharmac fully fund the greater percentage of a lot of it, but there's still a cost, and that's seen as a barrier. So we actually thought, well, if you're going to be working with the subsequent children policy, then we needed to also be actually making sure that everyone's got access to that contraception.
How much is the 77 million?
Well, I think the state already does, because we do fully fund contraception for women predominantly, and so the fact that we do, what we're doing is actually trying to take down those barriers for those that are on a benefit when they're on such limited income, and that can be a barrier for them accessing their contraception.
The childcare for young people, is that target not too narrow?
And it being for just young
Just
people?
16, 17, 18-year-olds?
Yeah, well, this is the welfare reforms part one, and so we've got major reforms that are still coming through the system, and you will see other groups that are identified there. This is unashamedly targeted, predominantly at those 16 to 18-year-olds. They are the ones most likely to stay on benefit longer. They are the ones whose children are most likely to be disadvantaged. We are targeting more money, more services, and I think it's the right place for it to be.
Is there concern that such extreme targeting could lead to people falling through the gaps if they're not picked up by wider youth transition services?
Yeah, look, there will still be funding available for those that are over 18 years old or for those that are not deemed as being neat. There's many other services that are out there that provide to them. But we are quite unapologetically targeting those who are not engaged in education, employment and training and are quite frankly on a collision course to welfare. The younger you go on, the longer you are likely to be there. And you know, there's heaps of evidence that says once you're there for longer than 6 months, your likelihood of getting off diminishes by the day. And we want, you know, a brighter future and more opportunities for them. So get in younger, really target it, and we think we'll see the results.
Will there be any obligations for them to take up the contraception or incentives if they do?
No, there won't be. We're just making it available and they can come in and apply for that extra assistance and get it.
How much of the 77.6 million will be going specifically to the milestone or incentive payments for the public providers?
Right, so of that 148 million, about 77.6 million is going to for the NEAT, and the rest is going. So what you're seeing is about 13.5 million is going in for the actual incentive payments to the young person themselves, and most of the rest of it is going into actually providing the service to them. And so there will be milestones, so you'll give an administration fee up front to the service provider, and you will then pay them as they achieve milestones for that young person.
And is that 13 million, is that the $10 a week that they'd receive if they do 7?
Yeah, and it's $10 a week if they complete the budgeting, and then another $10 a week if they complete, if they're a parent, if they complete the parenting, and then another $10 a week if they've been 6 months in education.
Last week, the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance both talked about the early childhood education funding and said that they were looking at increasing participation, particularly Maori and Pacifica children. Where is that reflected in this package?
Yeah, I mean, that's really what this package is about. I mean, as the Prime Minister said, it does cover one of our key result areas. 56% of teen parents are Māori. So the thing is that 56% of it is being targeted to those young people. Pacific teens are 1.5 times more likely to get pregnant than European as well. So it's very much targeted at Māori and Pacific young women and their children in particular. And as such, we can hopefully see an increase in that participation if we're really picking up that cost. And of course, it's now a requirement that if you're receiving the benefit, then you must be in, you yourself must be in some form of training. And so, of course, your children need to be looked after.
The Prime Minister also said that there could be some people who lose around the margins. Can you explain where that is? On the ECE funding?
Well, I mean, you know, I'm sure the Prime Minister can sort of speak to that more, but I mean, once you start targeting and putting more money in where it's really needed, then, you know, there's X amount of places. We need more in New Zealand, there's no two ways about that. But, you know, is there places for everyone and is there funding on the margins? Well, I say we are targeting this specifically to those children, and I think it's where all evidence says it's needed most.
So, we're not in detail today, but essentially in early childhood education there are some minor changes, and those changes could result at the margins in some people getting not necessarily less funding over time, but not necessarily more as the general inflation rate
Is
increases.
there any means testing in
No.
ECE? So it won't be on the
No,
basis?
so essentially what's happening is the emphasis of new money, if you like, or reprioritised money, is going into targeting particularly low socio-economic groups, which are heavily dominated by Māori and Pacific. So essentially that's where the new funding is going, and other areas aren't necessarily getting new funding. So it's really at the margins
So
for
it'll be
other
more about funding centres and organisations as opposed to how parents access it?
Yeah, that would be a good characterisation.
You talked there about pulling some of the funding allocated for out years forward. How much is the total of that?
We are bringing forward $96.4 million. So each year in employment assistance, we spend about $130 million. So in some of those out years, we're bringing some forward to spend. And quite frankly, it makes sense because ultimately we're spending that on services that are provided outside of, so it's been counted as part of this package.
Prime Minister, in terms of your results, you talked about this package leading to a drop in the number of those on long-term welfare. Have you got a number on that? And over the next 3 to 5 years, how can we tell how much is due to this package and how much might be due to economic growth?
This will probably give you the exact numbers. It's $1 billion in terms of the estimated reduction in benefit costs. I can't tell you the exact breakdown, but Paula might be able to give you those. And the answer is, to the latter part of the question, I think that there are always a number of dynamic factors taking place in the economy. So as we know, when things get weaker, economically more people go on to a benefit, predominantly unemployment, but more people go on a benefit. So it's not exactly as if we're operating in an environment that's immune, we accept that. And we certainly expect the economic conditions to be stronger over the next 2 or 3 years. But I'd say that the combination of a better economy and this package certainly helps, but you might have exact breakdown.
Yeah, well, I mean, ultimately I say it doesn't matter, you know, as long as we are, I mean, what it's got is everyone pretty focused on those key areas and where we are, and if the sooner we get in, then the better off we're going to be as far as bringing down those long-term for 12 months or more on benefit.
That $1 billion.
What's it?
What's that, sorry?
What's that $1 billion based on? I mean, what sort of economic turnaround do we need to see to achieve that?
Yeah, well, we're saying that these policy changes, you know, should see that kind of saving long term and that kind of numbers coming off. So, you know, that's kind of projections we've seen to date. I think particularly though as you see the welfare reforms part 2 that will be coming out in about August this year, I think that will, as we get into the policy detail which we're in now, and that starts winding itself out, you may see those figures move around a little bit. At the moment they are estimates from Treasury and MSD, and they're about, you know, they're sort of the best guess really.
I mean, if you have a look at it, I mean, Future Focus, when we implemented that, had some quite clear changes to the number of people who were on long-term beneficiaries. In certain areas, we're introducing things like work testing for mothers on the DPB. Well, that's a new requirement effectively, so that's obviously going to have some impact. So if you track your way through those, I think you can see real changes. And in fact, actually, if you look at our benefit numbers, as you know, because we release them very regularly, they're continuing to track lower. And I think the Household Labour Force survey last week was more a reflection on people's confidence they might get a job than concern that the economy's not producing enough jobs.
Just back on the childcare subsidies, how much do you spend roughly on childcare subsidies for everyone else, not this group that you're targeting today?
Well, I can only speak at it from a welfare perspective because that's kind of what I'm in charge of, and it's hundreds of millions. So I don't have that figure directly in front of me, but it's hundreds of millions that we spend on subsidies, particularly for those that are not just on benefit, but also for those that are lower income and are eligible for the working income subsidy.
And in broad terms, ECE funding was about $1.4 billion last year. So that's the overall level of expenditure where the government subsidises parents to send their child to an early childhood facility.
So we can add 44 million for that?
Oh, that's it.
What's the average estimated cost of childcare for a standard parent? I mean, how does that compare to the $6 grant subsidy? What's the difference?
Yeah, look, by the best modelling that they've done, and MSD worked really closely with education on this, it sort of depends, I would tell you. So it's different for Kohanga, it's different for different regions, it's different for different types of childcare. So we have taken what we believe that $6 an hour on top of what's already going in via education, and that 44 million should cover the costs of someone putting their child in. But that's an average, so some might be 7 or 8, some are 3 or 4, some are actually free in some community-based centres. But as you know, with early childhood, it's an incredibly complex and diverse kind of sector, and it would depend where you are. But we've kind of gone for the upper end, if you like.
What will be the situation for parents in a case where the cost of the childhood care is, say, $10 or $11 an hour and it's only a $6 subsidy?
Yeah, well, look, we could look at that, and we certainly would, because we, as you say, we're pretty committed to reducing those barriers, but kind of reluctant as well. Once you start putting a really high price on it, you find that services actually go towards that. We think that this should cover all costs for that child to be in childcare.
Will there be any kind of quality control on the people who can qualify as providers and be eligible for the subsidy payments?
So for the centres, they must be qualified. So they must have gone through. They must be Yes, there must be through education, so there must be services.
So you're not opening up a new category?
No, although I must admit I'm looking carefully at that guaranteed childcare payment and seeing, you know, is there some more informal arrangements that can be made. There's home-based care as well, which obviously you see through Bernardo's and organisations like that would be available for that childcare payment too. And I think it's a really interesting sort of dynamic to look at. You know, you look at some that are quite Mariah-based and some other kind of arrangements where the teen parent is on-site learning and, you know, their baby's being looked after in the room next door. Now that you've got more formal arrangements with that with a teen parent unit, but you could equally have some more informal arrangements that might work as well.
So what guarantees can you give that people won't be replicating the American experience where some of the main beneficiaries of the shift from welfare to work have been a new category of second-class childcare providers, and the people who are facing the work obligation have to take the standard that's on the market?
Yeah, well, look, we're working really closely with education on this stuff, and I would say that they have very high quality and demands that they make on it. There's rigorous checks and balances that go on those centres, and I'm very confident that that regime works.
Okay, we'll go. Okay. So, just in terms of my activity this week, I'll be at caucus tomorrow and question time on Tuesday and Wednesday. On Thursday and Friday, I'm at Trends in Queenstown. On Saturday and Sunday, I'm at the National Party Lower North Island Regional Conference in Napier. In terms of the House this week, we'll be doing the first readings of the International Finance Agreements Amendment Bill, Child Support Amendment Bill, and the Administration of Community Centres Orders Bill. Wednesday is a Members' Day. Questions?
What's your concerns about the Act brand as you head towards election in 2014? Do you think there's some people say that they've got problems and they might well be there?
Well, it's not for me to speculate on that. I mean, we're 6 months into the second term of the National League government. There's 2.5 years to run. A lot of water to flow under the bridge from
But
there.
are they worth resuscitating in terms of where you sit?
Well, I'm not going to make decisions about future coalition or support partners years into the future. I mean, we've got 2.5 years to run. Our relationship's a good, solid one. It's a good working relationship.
Damaged, haven't they?
Well, that's for other commentators to opine on that, not for me. I can just tell you about the working relationship I have, and it's a good one.
Do you at this stage have any problems with doing a deal with John Banks in 2014, looking forward? I know I'd ask you to say whether you will, but do you have any problems with doing it?
Well, I think the important point there is a deal with the ACT Party, and we've worked very constructively with them in the past.
So no problem with an ACT Party deal?
Well, I'm not saying particularly have a deal with a John Banks issue either, but the point there is we deal with parties, not individuals, really.
What about Colin Craig? What do you make of him and putting his hand up over the weekend saying that, you know, while he doesn't agree with you on everything, he'd be happy to work with you, he'd support you. He's even said today that if there was a by-election, he'd return copies of supply to you.
Well, the way I'd phrase it is that, look, the government I lead, I think, has proven to be centre-right, moderate, pragmatic, and economically and fiscally conservative. And it seems to me that Colin Craig and the Conservative Party broadly fall into that category. So had they been installed into Parliament post the 2011 election, we certainly would have sat down and had a discussion with them.
Is there anything about what?
How closely are you working with Colin Craig at the moment, and is he briefing you on development?
Well, I'm certainly not at all having had any discussions with him. I don't know whether the President's had any discussions with him. I simply don't know, but on the parliamentary side, none whatsoever in terms of engagement.
What do you know of him so far? Do you trust his character?
Well, I really only know him in terms of the work that he did around smacking me one of the times when I met him when he led that campaign. So I agree, that I would meet with him and discuss the issues with him. Really, I don't know too much other than that, and obviously ran for the mayoralty back in 2010.
Have you got any concerns about any of the answers that John Banks gave last week?
Well, what I'm focused on is the most important, and that is the categorical assurance that he's complied with the Local Electoral Act.
Do you have any concern that you've got two ministers who gave contradictory answers in terms of the issue around Kim.com and his applications by the mansion, where Boris Williamson said that Mr Banks asked him to look at it favourably, Mr Banks says no, he only asked about process.
Well, again, what I care about is that we got the right outcome here, and I haven't been privy to nor asked a lot of questions about, because it's not relevant, it's historic, about what occurred between Maurice Williamson and Simon Power. But what I've been concerned about is we get the right outcome, and I think the result that those ministers finally agreed on was the right one.
Have you talked to John Banks yet about taking it?
I haven't, no.
You haven't had a conversation at all about
No. No.
Is it, then to be clear, is it a civil matter of asking Mr Banks about whether he acted lawfully and leaving it that? Because, you know, the further he gets questioned, obviously, by the media, he tends to avoid questions, and from your perspective, you just want a straight question about the legality.
Well, the issue here is that there's a police complaint that's been taken about whether he was in breach of the Local Electoral Act. He's given me an assurance he hasn't broken the Act. I'm not either a person responsible for that investigation nor a lawyer, so I can't give you a view on that. I can only accept the minister at his word, as I accept ministers at their word on every issue, unless they're found wanting. And so in that regard, that's the salient point. All of the other bits and pieces are for others to concern themselves about if they wish to. But in terms of the legal position in relation to the law, as I said in Parliament at length, on the advice of the Cabinet Office at least, last week, in terms of whether ethically the law is good or bad or indifferent, well, that doesn't apply. The ethics component of the Cabinet Manual applies when someone holds a warrant. My own personal view of the Local Electoral Act is it's a very loose piece of legislation, happens to be very similar to the legislation that applied to central government till the previous Labor government changed the Electoral Finance Act. And if they found the Local Electoral Act that offensive in the past, maybe they should have just got on and changed both of them at the same time. They chose not to.
Could it be that Colin Craig, just the question about it, becomes quite a plausible and credible future coalition partner or not?
Well, in the end, that's in the hands of future New Zealand voters, but he might do. He might become a credible player. Others might emerge as well.
Also,
2.5 years from now.
But you as Prime Minister pick your coalition partners too. I mean, we sat here a year or so ago when you brought out Mr Pearce. But you brought people in and out as Prime Minister.
Correct.
I mean, do you think this guy is plausible and credible?
Well, as I said,
is he a nut job?
Well, as I said, I'm far from ruling him out. If he had been, if the Conservative Party had made it into Parliament, we would have sat down and had a discussion with them, see if they wanted to work constructively with us.
Colin Craig institutes a weekly prayer session that's compulsory for his staff to attend.
We won't be doing that.
Why not?
Did he brief you on that though? Do you have any concerns about that?
No, he didn't brief me on that. The only discussions that I've had with him from memory was when he came to see me about the smacking. And it came because he put, as I understand, about $400,000 into an advertising campaign about wanting to change that law. I had a discussion with him about why I'd acted the way I'd acted as leader of the opposition and what I thought the application of the law would look like. He actually seemed happy with those explanations when I gave them to him.
Why have you chosen to take the assurances from Mr Banks, the Chief of Staff, rather than face to face?
Well, firstly, when someone speaks to me, my Chief of Staff, they speak to me, and with greatest respect for the previous administration, when they spoke to Heather Simpson, I think they took it that they were speaking to Helen Clark, and God help them if they crossed Heather Simpson. So basically it's the same principle. I mean, the person's communicating their view to us. I also accepted Winston Peters at his word, despite what he might say. In February of 2008, when the issue about whether he accepted a donation from Owen Glen became public, he came back to New Zealand, he held up a sign that said no, and I never questioned him on that. I accepted his word in good faith. It was only 6 months later, when hard evidence from Owen Glen came out, that I started saying he needed to reconcile that position. He was then on his way to the Privileges Committee and ultimately the SFO. So, unlike David Shearer, the Greens and Winston Peters, I didn't jump to conclusions in the first instance. I gave him the benefit of the doubt.
You don't think .com's claims are hard evidence?
No, not in the same way that Owen Glen was.
.com claims he's got 3 witnesses to the conversation of the thank you. I mean, there's the person who answered the phone call, there's the person who was reported in the Dominion, and there's .com himself. So there's 3 witnesses versus 1, and you think there's no credibility?
No, I would have said that's a matter for the police.
Well,
I've accepted the minister.
So the question about ethical conduct that you raised before, in terms of you say that unethical conduct which takes place prior to becoming a cabinet minister is not in question?
Well, effectively, what the advice of the Cabinet Office is, in terms of ethical behaviour, it's prior to becoming a minister. It's when they hold the warrant, not prior to.
So we have seen members leave Parliament altogether as a result of conduct that had taken place well before they became MPs, including both David Samuels and David Garrett.
Well, in the case of David Garrett, don't forget he wasn't subject to the Cabinet manual because he wasn't a minister.
But he did leave Parliament, which I'd say is a more serious sanction than just leaving Cabinet.
Yep.
I mean, are you not
But
concerned
the Cabinet
that
manual didn't drive that behaviour.
are you not concerned that your MPs be seen to be acting in an ethical standard?
Well, what I've said to you, and consistently with this topic, is that there's been allegations he broke the Local Electoral Act. I've, through my office, directly asked him that question. He's directly and categorically answered that question that he did not.
There's also been allegations that he's lied to the media on repeated occasions. Do you believe him that he doesn't remember the helicopter flight?
Well, again, it's not my job to forensically go through each and every statement, nor is my job to
Do you
couch.
believe that he can't remember the helicopter flight?
As we go on to other questions.
Well, no, the question.
No, if you're not going to let me answer, then I'll go
Well,
on
you're
to
not
some
answering the question. I mean, it's a straightforward question. He's lied to the media. The press gallery who are assembled here.
They are your
believe,
views.
Well, I'm pretty sure that most of the press gallery believe he's lied to the media. So the question is lying to the media not something which is required of cabinet ministers?
Okay, any other questions?
Can
Yeah,
I ask?
Tracy.
It was about INFAT. Did you have a discussion about INFAT last week with other ministers, and has anything progressed beyond the current situation which we had that document that Phil Goff waved around?
Well, we had a Cabinet Committee meeting last week where there was fairly extensive conversation, and present at that meeting obviously was the Chief Executive and Minister of the number of ministers in the State Services Commissioner, head of DPMC. We haven't had I haven't had subsequent discussions post that meeting.
Has DPMC taken a greater role in that restructuring then, or an oversight role?
Well, I think what's fair to say is the central agencies have been playing a role, as you would expect them to. That makes sense, and so whether it's Treasury, State Services Commission or DPMC, they've all been involved.
Can we ask on the issue of Sky City?
Yeah.
Given that you're negotiating with them at the moment
Yeah.
to have more poking machines, isn't it important to look at the intervention track record when it comes to problem gambling?
Yeah, so let me just sort of answer that, because I know you guys ran a story I saw on Friday night. Basically what happened is that Sky City have two issues, right? They're required under the 2003 Gaming Act to have a host responsibility program as part of their licence, and that is reports, they report effectively to the Gaming Commission every 6 months on that. So what happened was the last report was in December 2011. Effectively, what those reports have shown is that the number of problem customers who observed showing one or more signs of problem gambling since 2008 has risen from around 661 to 2,582. What the Gaming Commission and others are saying, and they support the view of Sky City, is that Sky City has become far more sophisticated at actually observing and picking up the signs where someone might be a problem gambler. They're also saying that the fact that someone shows or observes this, or we observe a sign, or they observe a sign, doesn't mean that they are necessarily a problem gambler. It just means they're on their way. So, in a nutshell, I think what that report shows is that Sky City have got better at using techniques to work out whether someone is a problem gambler or not. They certainly take their responsibilities very seriously, as they should, because if they don't, they can lose their licence.
The information that we've got shows the same, that it's getting more sophisticated in the way that they can identify them, but they're not raising the level of people that stop coming through their doors. Is that concerning for you?
Well, again, the explanation I have for that is that just because they observe a sign, there are very different degrees of severity of those signs. So just because they observe someone having behaviour that might indicate they've got a problem doesn't mean they should necessarily be stopped. So there's not a direct correlation to the number of people they stop coming to the casino and the number of people they observe having a sign. And in a way, I guess the way I would sort of, as an analogy, we've become a lot better at reporting as a country domestic family violence. So those numbers have dramatically increased, but whether the level of domestic family violence has increased at that level in New Zealand is very subjective, I think, and arguably not the case. We just become better at reporting it.
But to use that analogy, prosecutions have increased.
Sorry?
But to use your analogy, domestic violence, prosecutions have increased, but actions on Sky City against problem gamblers haven't.
Well, again, I think what they've become is a lot better at looking at. There have been more cases where they've been stopping people, and that's a good thing. They'll continue to work on that.
We also understand to keep their licence that they have to go through the Gambling Commission and have a review every couple of years. We understand that that's not happening. Is that a worry for you?
Well, that would be a matter for the Gambling Commission. I just don't have any information whether they've done that, but their responsibilities are to do that, and they'd be part of DIA, and you need to talk to them about that.
And you'd be worried if they weren't?
Yeah, well, their responsibilities are to do that, just as it's Sky City's responsibility to have a proper host responsibility program and to follow that program.
Are you concerned about any deceptions around John Banks supporting legislation for a deal with the Sea Sky City Girls Convention, given the contribution they made to his Auckland Miracle campaign, which he says was anonymous, but which obviously there are question marks around?
No, I wouldn't have any concerns about that.
Well, why not? Wouldn't it be seen to be some sort of conflict of interest potentially?
No, I don't think so.
So how important is a sinking lid policy on pokie numbers in Auckland City in terms of offsetting concerns about increases in gambling opportunities that might be created by the National Conference?
Well, I think if you were to say, if there is concern at all in relation to this, potential for Sky City to develop a convention centre, is in relation to the fact that they'll have more pokie machines, and so people have concerns that there's a direct correlation between the number of pokie machines and the number of people that experience problem gambling. So therefore, by definition, if the overall number of pokie machines is reducing, then that should help allay fears that there will be more machines to prey on people who may therefore develop problem gambling issues. And as I said this morning, the number is, well, it's either 483 or 488, you can pick your poison. 483 is in the general wider community, 488 includes casinos, must be 5 that have come out. But overall, my basic point is that even if we do a deal with Sky City, on the advice I've had, there will be less poker machines around New Zealand than there was at the starting point. And I think that's a really important point, that we as a government are conscious of that issue.
So in terms of Auckland though, it's 488, that's nationwide, isn't it? Yep. Whereas in Auckland, I mean, if you've got a few hundred more poker machines in Auckland, even with a sinking lid policy in Auckland, that's still quite an increase in machines.
Well, I'm not sure you can guarantee that's right, that it would be more in Auckland. We need to get that breakdown for you. It might be that there's no change in Auckland. It might be that it's still less in Auckland. I need to give you that exact data. Because primarily they're actually in Auckland.
It's a little bit cynical taking, as the Greens have said in one of their press releases, the reduction in overall pokie numbers across the country, which is communities acting against the number of pokie machines they have in their area, and using that reduction in order to boost the number in Auckland.
No, I mean, I think that the basic point here is that, as I've said so often with the Sky City deal, there's no magic to this. I mean, we want to develop a convention centre. The government's preferred position is not to be putting money into that. The centre itself doesn't generate enough income captured in the centre to pay for the full costs. It can capture some revenue, but not enough. The wider economic benefits to the region are substantial and therefore worth doing it. And the only way of cross-subsidising that is through other forms of benefit or income. Well, and so overall, I think, if the concern is that there's a direct correlation between the number of poker machines and problem gamblers, then people can take comfort from the fact that those numbers are reducing and have substantially reduced in the last 6 years.
But I think the point that the Greens are trying to make is that you didn't achieve the reduction, you're, as it were, cashing in on the reduction. Well,
however and why ever that reduction has started occurring, we can debate that point, but the basic point that is not debatable is that there is significantly less poker machines now than there was 6 years ago, and there will continue to be less over time.
What does that happen to 12 million Christchurch? Can you considering restrictions on sale attempts at the moment?
Look, I haven't had any advice on that. I mean, obviously it's very tragic and it's concerning because of the access and availability. But my experience generally is that retailers take their responsibilities very seriously and they look closely at substances that they do sell, and I think they do take a strong stance towards those areas. I mean, I'm just reluctant to get into further regulation unless we absolutely need to, because there are always people that can access that.
With some questioning of the priority that police have to investigating electoral offences, do you think they're the appropriate agency to do it, or should it be passed on to another agency?
Well, I think they're in reality the only one. I mean, the police in New Zealand are the body responsible for administering the law, and whether someone meets the law or breaks the law, and on that basis they're the only person that can do that, they're the only body that can do that.
Do you think they should give it more of a priority?
Well, I don't know what priority they're giving it. You need to go and ask them.
Also, the Electoral Commission suggested allowing Māori to change roles every term rather than every 5 years.
Right.
Do you have a view on that?
Personally, I wouldn't have a problem with that, but you would need to go back. I mean, in the end, I think people have a right to choose to vote, and whether they want to vote on the Māori role or the general role is solely a matter for them. But there may be some other logistical reasons why it's more challenging, just in terms of the makeup of those particular seats and various other administration issues that I'm not privy to. But in broad principle, I've never been that worried whether someone's on the Māori role or the general role. It's just personal choice.
Prime Minister, on Friday you gave a long interview to John Campbell where you said that you hadn't spoken to Simon Power either before or subsequently about his role in the Kim.com affair. We've now had a court decision which has found that the Crown acted illegally when it seized assets from Kim.com, which exposes the Crown to potentially lawsuits and large amounts of money. Are you intending to talk to Mr. Power now?
No.
Why not?
I just don't think it's necessary.
Don't you think it's necessary to find out whether anything has gone wrong in relation to the Kim.com affair at this stage?
No, I mean, that would be a matter for Crown Law and the Attorney General.
So this is the responsibility now of Judge Collins as well, or just Chris Finlayson and the Solicitor General?
Top of my head would be the Attorney General and Solicitor General, but we'd need to get some advice on that.
Are you a little bit surprised, given that we now know that Simon the Power was aware from July 2011 about the Kim.com prosecution, that you were not informed?
No.
Even though people in your office were informed?
No.
Do you consider it okay for the Prime Minister not to be informed about police actions which are being planned on New Zealand soil?
Well, I don't get advised on that. As I said on John Campbell's show, the exception is that I was advised about the raid, and I was only simply advised by the Solicitor General as a matter of courtesy. They wouldn't come to me. In fact, it would be wholly inappropriate if they did. That would imply that I can somehow interfere as a politician in the justice system.
Well, you've said that, but
I
I'm
don't
not sure
think
that
that would be appropriate to do that. In terms of the other cases, as I say, to the best of my knowledge, I haven't been advised.
I don't know that it follows that just because you were informed that you can interfere. In this particular case, we have the extraordinary situation of foreign legal enforcement being taken place on New Zealand soil in a fairly controversial circumstances. This isn't business as usual in relation to policing.
No, and that's probably why the Solicitor General took the view that he should advise me.
So you don't expect the Solicitor General to inform you about extraordinary matters in relation to police enforcement?
As a general rule, no.
So if, for example, they start, I don't know, acting against some security plot, some more terrorists are found, perhaps you wouldn't expect to be informed?
Well, I'm not going to comment on hypothetical examples that you might want to dream up.
Well, in that particular example, I'm pretty sure the previous Prime Minister was
I'm truly
informed.
a patient person. I think most of you will agree.
The previous Prime Minister was informed, as far as I know, about Operation 8.
Well, again, I don't have details there.
And you're also the Minister of the SIS and the GCSB.
Yep, so SIS could do that under certain circumstances, and in the previous Irawera case, from memory, SIS did inform me, but I can't remember exactly at the point, but they actually failed to tell me that I was the proposed victim. They only let me know that when it was going to come up in the Sunday Star Times the day before, so I could advise my kids.
Prime Minister, you're now saying you were informed as Leader of Opposition about the terrorists,
You're doing a wonderful job trying to ride to the rescue. Fire away, Marika.
I don't know, I'm running to the rescue.
Yeah.
What was your reaction to the leak of that cabinet paper last week? Did you at all ask Tax Services Commission to have a look at it?
I haven't, although they are understanding having a look at it. Look, personally, I was deeply disappointed because at the end of the day, these are people charged with diplomacy and are charged with, I think, upholding the highest standards by virtue of the jobs that they hold. and they completely failed that test. But, and I think there'll be an awful lot of people in MFAT, whatever they think of the process and whatever they think of the outcome, will be ashamed at their organisation as a result of that. And I actually feel for that organisation because it's full of a lot of tremendously good people, but one or two people have really let that organisation down badly.
Are you sure that it came from the ministry?
I can't be sure where it came from. As I said, historically we're just not good, but my understanding is about 20 people had access to the cabinet paper.
Do you know what this affects the level of discontent about these changes?
Yeah, look, it obviously does, and there's no secret. You can read the papers like anyone else. Even on a slightly altered outcome, there will still be some people losing their jobs, and it's eminently possible that some of it's like that is somebody that's in that category. And yep, I feel tremendous sympathy for people in that position, but in the end, when you come into an organisation like a government department, then you have a responsibility to act professionally, and whoever's let that information has.
Have you sought assurances from Mr McCulley that it didn't come from one of his staff?
Well, I haven't, but I have no reason to believe the staff would give things to Phil Goff.
But does it also reflect the process was botched?
Well, you can argue that the means justifies the end, but I personally don't think it does.
But also, I mean, in opposition, you used, or not necessarily you yourself, but used material from government departments. I mean, so...
Well, you haven't seen me whining about it, and I've been pretty sanguine about the probability that we'll actually find who's responsible. I'm just saying that if you think about the role of impact, flat fat, it's diplomacy. And that is the most undiplomatic thing you can find them do. And as a general rule, my experiences of interfacing with MFAT people is they're hugely professional, and it doesn't matter how badly they feel about proposed changes, most of them will be deeply ashamed at MFAT.
Do you think that MFAT staff will get the final proposal presented to them on May 10, as was originally planned? Because you didn't discuss it at Cabinet today, did you?
Yeah, so when's the 10th? That's this Thursday, isn't it? Is that right? Is that right? I don't think so, no. I mean, I would imagine Cabinet will want to have a discussion.
And do you think that the final plan is pretty much there now, or does there need to be a lot more work?
I think the general feeling is it's getting closer. I can't honestly say whether there'll be many tweaks and changes, because we simply didn't have that discussion. Mr McCulley wasn't there today, so we'll have an opportunity to get those cabinet papers, the final cabinet papers, obviously over the weekend, and have some discussions. And from there, the central agencies have still got more work to do with MFAT, so it could change a bit. But I think the general thrust of where they're going looks fairly self-explanatory.
Did the cabinet committee meeting with that last week with John Allen criticise it?
Criticise John Allen? No. I don't think that's right.
Raise any questions about its performance?
No, and that wouldn't be the forum to do that, even if we had concerns. I'm not saying we do, but that wouldn't be the place to do that. That cabinet committee was about trying to get a better understanding so the government was fully sighted on what the proposals are.
Is there any concern though that there wasn't any sort of like overarching strategic framework around the restructuring proposal that was put up by MFAT and John Allen?
Sorry, one more time, please.
Was there any concern that there lacked sort of like an overarching framework or strategic plan?
Well, the overall strategy of where they're going was part of the discussion and how that interfaces with the other parts of New Zealand Inc. And that's one area where more work is being undertaken.
And is that what BPMC is looking at, that strategy?
They're looking at the overall thing, just to head check everything and to make sure that changes when they finally go through are the most appropriate. Working with the State Services Commission.
So they will come up with that final strategy and then...
I'm not sure that I'd characterise it exactly that way, but they're just working on the overall process now with the State Services Commission.
I take it Mr McCulley was actually at that cabinet meeting.
Yes, he was.
And is it fair to say that you are taking a much more hands-on role in this sort of area than you normally would as Prime Minister?
Well, I think the way I'd characterise it is, in terms of the first round of proposed changes, we as a cabinet were not fully sighted on those changes. We had some idea of one or two, but not the vast bulk. And so we're now in a better position, I think, as a purchaser to understand and get a sense of the implications.
When you say a wider view of New Zealand, what do you mean? Do you mean the trade presence or...?
Well, ultimately, if you think about MFAT, I mean, it's part of what I would describe as New Zealand Inc. abroad, and whether it's immigration, tourism, various, defence, various other agencies, export education, they all effectively work different strands but of the same song, if you like. And so we're just trying to make sure that whatever changes might take place with MFAT are aligned with our objectives in other places. And so, for instance, if you think about Asia, I mean, that's been an obvious place where we've been looking to increase resources and do better. We're clearly slightly reducing our focus on Europe or parts of Europe. We just need to make sure that's fully aligned with our other objectives.
Does that mean that the original paper or the original work done by MFAT didn't look at that either in the geographic sense or in terms of the other defence, education and so on?
No, I think if I was to characterise it, what I'd say is that they seem to apply the same approach to every office. So, for instance, if they were going to undertake outsourcing, the view was to outsource potentially certain services right across the board. And whereas in certain locations that just, to us, just didn't seem to make sense. And that was part of the general conversation with John Allen.
So
Are you worried that the angst around the restructuring is undermining New Zealand's trade interests at the moment, particularly around trade negotiations?
No, I mean, I think our trade team is, first rate, and I think they're doing a really good job for us. I'm just saying we just need to make sure, again, we act as one, because the government is ultimately one.
So in hindsight, what went wrong with the handling of this whole process?
Oh, I'm not going to go into characterise all that.
But
I don't think that would be
you must
productive.
accept that it's very least very messy.
Well, what I'd say is the government's made a lot of changes over the last 3.5 years, and generally speaking, it's gone smoothly. And whatever way you define this hasn't. We need to learn some lessons from that.
Prime Minister,
Sky City,
Yeah.
Len Brown has asked the government, says he's asked the government to include a number of measures should this convention centre deal go ahead, including harm minimisation, such as harm minimisation officers on site, pop-ups and screen, but also a greater proportion of profits going to the community. Is that something that the government's prepared to take to Sky City in these negotiations?
Well, in terms of the first bit, I haven't had detailed discussions about those individual component parts, but the way I would characterise that is Len has always felt very strongly about ensuring that we have the highest level of harm minimisation techniques, and that he feels very passionately that Sky City and any other operator needs to observe and take that responsibility very seriously. So that has never been part of any kind of deal that there would be a reduction in that area. Whether there's a strengthening in that area, I don't know. I'm not privy to just haven't had the discussion with Stephen Joyce's officials about how they're progressing at this point. But it's never been a question of lowering harm minimisation techniques. That's always been off the table. And we've always known strongly that Len would feel very passionately about that. In terms of the latter, there's as you're aware, completely different structure with community-based trusts as there is to casinos. So the community-based trust, while it's true that they put more into the community, they still only put 1/3 of the income in. So 2/3 is still spent on administration, lots of other things. Sky City pays the same, if not arguably more money, but it goes in different places, whether it's company taxes or their gaming levies and various other levies. And we haven't had any discussions about whether that mix might change, because in a way they're slightly different issues. I mean, the issues about whether sports clubs and the likes rely heavily on pokie machines is, the truth is that they do, and it will have quite an impact on them as we take those machines out. But as I said, those machines are coming out anyway, so that is a wider issue the government at some point will have to face.
When can we expect a final resolution on this talks?
On the Sky City? Look, I honestly don't know. I mean, it's progressing and it's obviously taking time, but I mean, as I so often said again in the past, I mean, some people have argued there's been a lack of process. You might make the case there's been too much process. These negotiations have gone on for years. And I can't tell you that they're going to be completed in the next week or fortnight or month or 6 months. It's gone on for 2 years so far.
The numbers on pokies that have been banded around 350 to 500. Can you narrow that range down at all?
I just don't know. I haven't seen this. I haven't seen the latest proposal.
Would the support of the mayor and/or council be a prerequisite to you, or is it just highly desirable?
Well, it's certainly highly desirable, and I don't think the support of the mayor is in question. You know, I've seen him on numerous occasions, and I'm confident that we'll get him over the line.
He's been placed in a very difficult position, obviously, by the donation scandal. this week we can expect you to face a lot of questions in the House about this and about .com and about
just be another
John
week.
Banks. Are you concerned about how much flack you're having to take for John Banks? Why do you want to keep him? What value does he give you?
Well, as I've so often said, you know, I'm not going to sack a minister for observing the law. I think we're pretty much done. Thanks very much.